The Venezuela Nuestra campaign command denounced the international media's actions to disregard electoral results and processes. In the United States, President Joe Biden signed an executive order to close the border with Mexico. And in South Africa, authorities reported Tuesday at least 22 people killed after flooding caused by torrential rains and fierce winds. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The Venezuela Nuestra campaign command denounces the international media manipulation to disregard electoral results and processes. The general coordinator of the campaign command, Jorge Rodriguez, showed examples of manipulation carried out by the right wing through digital platforms on the elections in Mexico, comparing them with the attacks and media blockades in Venezuela. In this regard, Jorge Rodriguez warned that just like the Mexican far-right, Venezuelan extremists intend to implement a plan to commit fraud after the presidential elections on July 28th and promote violence again in the country.
The right wing has that characteristic. The right wing takes the lie, and since they have the tools, since they have the communicational tools, since they have tools for psychological warfare, they dedicate themselves to impose matrices like this. Through thousands and thousands and thousands of bots they had hired for the right-wing candidacy. Le Monde Infobae, a trash page like Infobae, says, Le Monde analyzes narco-candidate/narco-candidate. Of course, the Le Monde article is a denunciation of how they are trying to smear the good image of the leftist candidate in Mexico. But listen, if it sounds familiar to you, it is an absolute coincidence, as the people of Mexico was a victim of a mega electoral fraud. This was being said in other right-wing pages and the main Spanish Mexican media yesterday.
Jorge Rodriguez also pointed out that the revolution has recognized each one of the electoral results in the country.
The right wing only recognizes elections results when they win. In 31 elections that have taken place in Venezuela, in 31 elections, the Chavismo, the revolution, the force of the homeland have been defeated in 2. In 2007 by a few tens, less than 30,000 votes, and the first one to come out and recognize with the novelty that always characterized him was Commander Chavez. We lost, by very few votes, but we lost, and also in 2015. And in spite of the fact that we already knew the disaster they were going to create from the National Assembly, in spite of all the damage they did, all the robbery they committed, all the mistreatment to our people through violence, with a call to military intervention, with a call to intervention, with the brutal sanctions.
Also in Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro was received by a crowd of citizens on his arrival in the state of Trujillo. During the rally, President Nicolás Maduro was welcomed with great joy by the people of Trujillo, who ratified their support to the policies implemented during his administration. Also during the visit, the president inaugurated an integral diagnostic center and integral rehabilitation center, Dr. Alan Delfin. The attendees also rejected the unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States and the calls from the far right to destabilize the country. Also on Tuesday, Venezuelan Foreign Affairs Minister Iván Gil arrived in China to strengthen bilateral relations between the two countries. The Venezuelan Foreign Affairs Minister visit will run until Friday, June 7th. Iván Gil traveled to the city of Beijing at the invitation of his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. The visit seeks to continue strengthening strategic alliances between the two countries. Gil will carry out a broad agenda of assessment and follow-up of the agreements that pursue the prosperity of both peoples.
The China-Venezuela strategic partnership has been a model of solidarity for almost 50 years under the principles of mutual respect, equality, solidarity, and non-intervention, being a pillar of the new multipolar geopolitics. With the arrival of Commander Hugo Chavez to the presidency, China-Venezuela relations acquired a strategic character by outlining a cooperation map that prioritizes shared benefits and counteracts Washington's hegemonic pretensions in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2001, both nations raised their relationship to a strategic partnership for shared development, which laid the foundations for the China-Venezuela High-Level Joint Commission, a mechanism for planning and executing cooperation projects that came into effect after Jiang Zemin's visit to Caracas. As of 2013, a new stage in Beijing-Caracas relations began with the leadership of Nicolás Maduro and Xi Jinping, consolidating themselves as key partners beyond the economic, commercial, and financial spheres. Both heads of state signed cooperation projects that are currently reflected in more than 600 strategic agreements based on a humanistic vision of shared development that seeks to satisfy the needs of the people under the premise of guaranteeing the prosperous progress of the Beijing-Caracas partnership.
The governments of China and Venezuela signed 31 bilateral agreements under the All-Weather Strategic Partnership. The agreements signed by both countries at the 17th High-Level Joint Commission show the scope of the dynamic alliance that aims at comprehensive development and a broad potential in various areas of the economy. Of 31 agreements, 10 are cooperation instruments that prioritize the areas of economy, health, mining, housing, electric energy, and telecommunications, among others. 18 other agreements were signed in the area of politics, economics, trade, education, science and technology, airspace, and communication. Finally, both countries agreed on 3 cooperation documents also linked to the areas of development included in the Bolivarian economic agenda. U.S. President Joe Biden signed on Tuesday an executive order to close the border with Mexico and reduce the number of people who can apply for asylum in the United States. The initiative allowed the U.S. authorities to close the border with Mexico if daily average of migrant encounters reaches 2,500 at the official ports of entry. According to a senior administration official, the shutdown would go into effect immediately since that threshold has already been met. The border would reopen only once the number falls to 1,500. Experts estimate the measure shows Biden is taking actions ahead of the November elections and after most Republicans and some Democrats in the Senate rejected a border security bill in February.
In the United States, this action will help us to gain control of our border, restore order into the process. This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage. We'll carry out this order consistent with all our responsibilities under international law, every one of them.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees warned that citizens are facing a growing humanitarian crisis following the Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip. Recent reports by the United Nations affirmed that the health crisis in Gaza has been on the rise, and the main effects on citizens are injuries, trauma, mental disorders, and infectious diseases spread by the lack of basic services. The organization warned that in Gaza there is little medical attention and that malnutrition is advancing at an accelerated rate after the destruction of most of the territory and with it the livelihood of the population. The United Nations has repeatedly called on the international community to promote a ceasefire in Gaza to address the humanitarian crisis in the territory, aggravated by the beginning of the Israeli siege on October 7, 2023. The Slovenian government and parliament recognized Palestine as an independent state. The Slovenian parliament voted overwhelmingly in favor of the move, following the recent steps of 3 other European countries, Spain, Norway, and Ireland. Slovenia first began the recognition process in early May, but hastened the process in reaction to Israel's latest attacks on the southern Gaza city of Rafah, resulting in a devastating humanitarian crisis. More than 140 countries recognize a Palestinian state, more than two-thirds of the United Nations.
Today is a big day. It is an important step. Slovenia has adopted a historic decision about the recognition of the Palestine state. I'm proud that both the government and parliament had the courage needed and that I was part of all this. Our main message is that we want that injustices done to the Palestinian people are repaired. And we recognize the Palestinian people's right to self-determination.
Several Latin American countries are experiencing the climate crisis with heat waves, forest fires, and water supply shortages.
Guatemala is going through a severe water and environmental crisis due to the forest fires that destroyed more than 40,000 hectares of forest between December 2023 and May 2024. The nation also suffered a drought that wiped out the crops of thousands of families. In Honduras, people are going through a severe drought, forest fires, and a layer of polluted air, which covers most of the country's departments. The government has recommended the use of masks due to the high levels of pollution. In El Salvador, uncertainty due to the effects of climate change and the current political situation have affected the country's youth. Salvadorans migrate to flee the drought and persecution brought on by Nayib Bukele's government state of exception. During the first 5 months of 2024, the effects of climate change had a strong impact on Latin America, affecting the quality of life of its population.
In the south of Brazil during this week, the landless workers movement holds the second Nature Day, sowing life to face the environmental crisis. With an airdrop of seeds, the movement reforests degraded territories in the state of Paraná. Our correspondent Ignacio Lemos has the details.
In Quedas do Iguaçu, 300 kilometers from Rio Grande do Sul, the state which suffered the biggest climate disaster in Brazil's history, the Landless Rural Workers Movement, MST, dropped 7 kilos of Jussara seeds, a native and endangered species, from a helicopter. The movement's environmental action is the second of its kind, in cooperation with Lula da Silva's government agencies, ministries, and the Federal Highway Police, with the purpose of regenerating the agrarian reform territories in the Atlantic forest, the biome that historically lost the largest portion of native vegetation.
We did an experiment last year and it was a success. I think the case of Rio Grande do Sul evidenced the climate crisis we are experiencing. Today's slogan has a lot to do with it, sowing life to face the environmental crisis. We are sowing millions of seeds, tens of tons of seeds. The movement shows us once again with banners the possibility for this crisis, which is not only a climate crisis, but also a civilizational crisis, a crisis of capital.
10 to 12,000 Jussara palm trees per hectare are expected to grow. By 6 years, the palm trees will begin to produce an average of 7 kilos of pulp used in ice cream, juices, cakes, and other products. The profit per hectare of $20,000 per year with no environmental impact stresses the need to rethink a production model where 21 to 37% of greenhouse gas emissions stem from agri-food chains dominated by a handful of global corporations.
El lanzamiento aéreo simula lo natural de la palmera.
Airdropping simulates the palm tree's natural environment. Grounding in the palm tree is about 15 to 20 meters high, and seeds fall from the sky, being scattered with such process of falling. Seeds enter under leaves in the vegetation, and this favors better germination of seeds because they already have a certain natural cover.
The agricultural frontier's expansion to pave the way for monocultures is responsible for 70 to 90% of deforestation worldwide. In territories where pine monocultures used to grow, native seeds are now sprouting and biodiversity is emerging. In a context where climate collapse seems irreversible, farmers show that all is not lost.
Literalmente dio resultado.
It literally paid off. We are here in the middle of the vegetation. We see this palm tree already big, full ground, the speed of what we planted, the amount of area planted. It was worth it. It paid off. The Federal Highway Police contribute to our planting in the region, made a lot of progress in gaining space and territory.
Forests and jungles are tools for balancing climate. The initiative of the Agrarian Reform Settlements is part of their national plan, Plant Trees, Produce Healthy Food, which aims at planting 100 million trees by 2030.
Ignacio Lemus para teleSUR desde Paraná.
In South Africa, authorities reported Tuesday at least 22 people killed on the eastern coast after flooding caused by torrential rain and fierce winds. Authorities said also 2 rare tornadoes were spotted. Temperatures plunged and snow fell in some central regions. Spokesperson from Nelson Mandela Bay municipality stated that more than 2,000 people have been evacuated from the area. Local authorities launched an appeal for donations of clothing, food, and blankets. The National Meteorological Institute reported that the country is in the grip of a cut-off low-pressure system marked by heavy rains and a cold snap that can also bring hail, snow, and strong winds. We have a fun short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly, share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Fun short break, don't go away. Welcome back. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced on Tuesday his victory in the general elections while the votes were still being counted, in which his party and those of his allies have a narrow majority to secure a third consecutive term. India's Electoral Commission announced that the Indian People's Party was leading with 240 seats out of the 543 that make up the lower house of parliament, and that the coalition to which it belongs was leading with 285 seats out of the 272 needed to form a majority. The results indicate that the head of government, Narendra Modi, will need the support of other parties to govern, an unprecedented fact in his previous mandates. The Prime Minister indicated that during his third term, he will continue with the good work of the last decade to meet the aspirations of citizens.
Continuously, for the third time, the people's love and blessings boost our morale and give new strength to our resolve. We, as Indians, will move forward together and advance the nation. In the third term, the country will write a new chapter of significant decisions.
In Ethiopia, the Tigray region is slowly emerging from the shadow of an armed conflict between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front that has left over 500,000 dead.
In Mekelle, the capital of the Tigray region, roads are being rebuilt, building construction has resumed and shops and cafes are bustling again, after a peace agreement ended one of the worst armed conflicts in recent years.
The progress we are witnessing is very encouraging. After the war, returning to peace and development brings me joy. This in itself is a significant change.
Although Tigray, Ethiopia's northernmost region, remains in the grip of a humanitarian crisis, the capital, Mekelle, is slowly returning to normalcy 19 months after the end of hostilities.
Now that the war has ended, there is peace. If this peace continues, all public services, such as telecommunications, hospitals, and schools, will bring about substantial change. Additionally, other development projects will be able to proceed.
Apart from the devastating human cost, the war in Tigray destroyed homes, hospitals, schools, and other vital infrastructure in the region of 6 million people.
People are finally finding some relief after many hardships. When there is peace like this, people can focus on their livelihoods.
In January 2023, the Ethiopian army confirmed the end of a 2-year conflict that, in addition to the death and devastation of communities, has also caused thousands of displaced people who want to return home soon.
China authorities reported the departure of the Chang'e 6 probe from the lunar surface, carrying samples collected on the far side of the moon, representing an unprecedented feat in the history of lunar exploration by humans. The Asian Giant's National Space Administration reported the lunar ascent module entered a pre-established orbit around the moon. The agency stated the spacecraft completed smart and quick work of sampling and then preserved the samples in a container inside the probe's ascent module. In turn, within the framework of Russian-Chinese cooperation in space research, the Deputy Director General of the Russian Space Agency, Roscosmos, mentioned the station's mission will be to carry out scientific research and to study and use the moon. The Chinese Laboratory for Lunar Samples is now ready to start the analysis of the samples obtained by the Chang'e 6 probe on the far side of the moon. The Lunar Sample Laboratory is located in the capital city within the facilities of the Beijing National Astronomical Observatory. The samples will pass from the orbiter returner in lunar orbit to be sent to Earth, where samples from the Chang'e 5 probe will also be studied. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.